Hello and welcome to Ronald Talks Difficult Literature. I'm Ronald, and on this show, we discuss classic works of literature from a self-learner's perspective, often with a guest host. The goal is to democratize literature, classic literature, which a lot of people find difficult, and make it more accessible to non-career academic types, people that just want to learn this stuff, maybe have been assigned it in their previous life, maybe as a high school student or at the university level, who now just are interested in these works. And maybe you are a student and you just want to get some of these works summarized, and I'll go through the list of the works that we want or will cover, but a lot of them are assigned in high school and university level literature courses. In this first podcast, I'm going to take a little bit more time to introduce myself briefly, and then what the podcast is and what types of literature we will be covering, specific types. And we have 7 categories, which I'll get to. And then after that, I will do a brief mini discussion of our first work of literature, which is assigned to high school students typically, and sometimes lower level university students in their introductory literature courses. And that's The Swimmer by John Cheever. It's a short work, about 12 to 15 pages. And then subsequent episodes, we'll do less intro and a lot more discussion. In fact, we have a guest host on the next episode who helped me create this podcast in the first place. And we're going to tackle King Lear there. I'm excited about that. So tune in next week. And on that note, we'll get back to the introduction. We're going to be covering classic works of literature. Covers a large span of time, and we're going to be talking about literature in a lot of different genres from all over the world. So let's just get into what genres are. My producer and I spent a lot of time. We selected a lot of works of literature, maybe 50 different ones, categorized them, and ended up with 7 different categories. And a lot of it's based on actually how long it takes to read the work, but not completely. Let me just go through those categories, and then I'll say a little bit more about each one and how we chose them. The 7 categories are poems, short stories, novellas, novels, epic novels, plays, and philosophical and theological treatises. And the poems part is pretty self-explanatory, I think, except that a poem can be a couple of stanzas. It could be a line, I suppose, but the ones we will talk about here are going to be things like Emily Dickinson, Because I Could Not Stop for Death. And that's a fairly short poem. And when you compare it to, say, The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot or Eugene Onegin, which is a novel in verse. What we won't include in poetry, though, we'll move it to another category, things like the Odyssey, epic poems. They're technically written in verse, but we're going to treat them as something else, and we'll get to that. So then we start lining up our works by length. Most of these are going to be stories, so short stories. These are going to be 10 to 50 pages, maybe. There's something like The Swimmer we'll do today, The Dead by James Joyce. It's a short story, but it is a difficult work, at least in my opinion, because James Joyce doesn't waste a word. I'll just put it that way. So you really have to read closely when you read that book. Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe is another short story we'll cover, and there are several. And then we'll get into the longer works like the novellas, and we're going from 50 to 250 pages. And, that's not just a hard demarcation line there, but that's generally where we'll break over to another category. Things like Metamorphosis, Franz Kafka, Pedro Páramo, Juan Rulfo. And you'll notice that I struggle with some of these names because I've only read them and not necessarily listened to somebody pronounce these things for me. So hopefully I get close on most things, but that's something that will happen. The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald, a pretty short story. Well, it's a novella. This one is assigned a lot, too, to high school students, and I hear mixed reviews on this. A lot of people don't think this book is worthwhile. That or Catcher in the Rye here, the same thing about that, and there are two different camps on that, and so we'll get into that. And then from novella, we go to novels. This is starting around 250 pages, going up to about 750 pages. And that's probably the bulk of most of what we'll discuss during this in this series. And those are things like Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway, or 100 Years of Solitude, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, or Master and Margarita, Bulgakov, or The Color Purple, Alice Walker. And then about once every 3 months, we'll do an epic novel. And that the episode will be at least an hour. I'm probably going to limit them to 1 hour. And so it may take a series of episodes to discuss something like The Count of Monte Cristo, Dumas, or Anna Karenina, or War and Peace, either of those by Leo Tolstoy, or Ulysses, James Joyce. That would probably take 4 or 5 episodes, maybe. We'll cover those things, but we're going to spend more time on those. And then we'll do plays. So plays usually around 50 to 250 pages. Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett, or King Lear we'll do next week. It's maybe 50 pages, but there's a lot packed in those 50 pages, and the language is difficult there. So that actually is a challenging episode. Streetcar Named Desire. I love Tennessee Williams, and so we'll do that. And I'd like Arthur Miller as well. Maybe my favorite play of all, Death of a Salesman. Really great play, my favorite play, and I blanked on it there for a second. So this is my first podcast. I plan to get better at this, so bear with me. And then philosophical and theological treatises. These are generally difficult, but they're worthwhile. And if you're in a course about the Western tradition, one of the very first things you'll be asked to read is the Torah, or the Tanakh, or the Septuagint, however you want to refer to it, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. And then there's Eastern literature as well. We're going to have the Bhagavad Gita. We'll deal with that. And then there's just philosophy, Plato's Republic. We'll get into that. So those things will be fun. I like to explore that type of stuff, but it can be really difficult to get through if you're not into philosophy. We'll do work from multiple areas, multiple nationalities, really, languages, Hebrew, ancient Greek. It's all going to be done in English language, at least my version of it. Sorry about that. Hebrew, ancient Greek, African, Colombian, British, French, Russian, American, Austrian, Irish, Mexican, Indian, Japanese, Chinese, all over the world at all different times of written literature. So that's the intro there, but I keep using the term difficult literature, and I use that in the title of the show. And what is difficult literature? And to me, the classics, people think they're difficult, and they are challenging sometimes, especially things that were written in a slightly different version of the language you speak, or things that were translated, which we'll get into some of those things as well. So yeah, that's the first thing that makes literature difficult, is the language. It is difficult to read Middle English, the King James Bible, or Shakespeare's works. I mean, you really have to concentrate on those. And then the plot can be difficult. There can be multiple plot lines. It's hard to follow. King Lear is a good example of that. There'll be at least 2 major plot lines going on at any one time, and there can be things that happen out of sequence. So that makes things difficult. One of the hardest things for me about when I first started getting into the classics, I started with a lot of Russian literature, and Russian literature, Tolstoy in particular, and Dostoevsky, or just about any Russian writer. There's so many characters, and the naming convention, one character may go by 2 or 3 different names. It's hard to keep up with those characters. So multiple characters. Count of Monte Cristo has a lot too, because it takes place over such a long time. And then something that makes literature difficult, I mean, it covers the human condition, which is not always good. Oedipus, The Color Purple by Alice Walker. There's difficult content in there. All's Quiet on the Western Front deals with difficult themes. So that can be a problem. And it's a problem to talk about, especially even something like Huck Finn. some of the language in there is not acceptable. So we can talk about whether this story is worthwhile at all, or is it something we need to give up. And I know there's a lot of discussion on that lately, and we're not even going to touch Lolita, so just don't worry about that. So what we'll do here is when we get each one of these works, we're going to try to ask and answer the following 3 questions. What scares people about this? What makes it so difficult? Why would they, if they're going to be assigned this in their coursework, what's so scary about it? And then who is it usually assigned to and why? Or who reads it? Who is the audience? And then, from our personal perspective, is this worth reading? Did you enjoy it? Or is it overhyped? So, and I'm just going to say the answer is rarely going to be yes to that, if at all. So I just love most of all the classic literature that I read. There are genres I like better than others, and I think a lot of that has to do with your background, whether you're, male, female, all kinds of factors go into that. But I don't, I enjoy classic literature of a lot of types, and we do women authors, men authors. It's not an issue for me. Okay, so me, I'm Ronald. I'm a would-be humanist, a self-learner with no formal training in literature whatsoever. I've been to the university, and I've got a background in engineering, and we didn't spend much time on literature. So I did that. I developed that affinity on my own. I developed it even before I went to university. I just liked to read when I was younger, and still do. Always had that passion, and that's, I have a lot of hobbies. I'm a home brewer, beer judge. I perform in a cover band on occasion, but the one hobby that I practice on a daily basis is reading, and the classics are what I like to read mostly. I do read contemporary works. It's not just classics, but we won't discuss those on this podcast. Now that I've introduced myself, our tagline here is going to be, let's turn the page and talk about The Swimmer by John Cheever. So let's do that. I really love this work. I just want to say that I reread it recently and I sent it to a friend of mine who also has a passion for literature. I've known him forever, and I got this from a professor that I'm an acquaintance with that teaches in his coursework. So it's something he just sent to me in a PDF format, and I was blown away by it. It's a short work. It's most commonly assigned to upper-level high school students, juniors and seniors in their AP English and literature and composition courses, and also to college undergrads, where it's almost universally included in an intro to lit, or American literature survey courses. So what's so difficult about The Swimmer? It's definitely not the most difficult piece of literature, but it does have its difficulties, because this work was written by John Cheever back in the 60s. He was writing a longer work, maybe a novel. He had about 150 pages. And for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, he decided to condense them down, and he got to 12 or 15 pages. Well, those 12 or 15 pages kind of remind me of The Dead, not in plot line or any other way other than there's a lot in those 15 pages, and it's not obvious what's going on right away. The story develops, and he uses a technique that I've heard described as time compression or time telescoping. So there's that little bit of a difficulty. So once you will get the vibe of what's going on, but it's not readily available. And the story it contains some difficult themes lurking beneath the surface. This is a casual swimmer, so it's called The Swimmer, right? It's a summer afternoon, and this guy's going to swim home. This guy has some problems. He's got some family problems, maybe some substance abuse problems. He's also got some problems with where he's going in life, and I shouldn't say more about that because it's not readily apparent at first. But it's full of imagery, and it transitions again, this is Cheever's, he transitions from the real to the surreal. And story begins in the aftermath of a pool party and a hard night of drinking by a man who seems to not have a care in the world in this The story slowly unwinds as this man swims through the backyards of the neighborhood. Some of the themes are emptiness, denial, alcoholism, escapism, social status loss, and aging. We'll see all that happen. So let's just do a plain language walkthrough, and I'm going to do my best here. The scene opens at the edge of the Westerhazy's pool. This is a family, and at the south end of an upper middle class suburban neighborhood in New York. Nettie Merrill has a glass of gin in one hand. So he's at the Westerhazy's house, and he's got this glass of gin in his hand, and he's sliding down the banister, and he smacks the statue of Aphrodite on the backside. And so this already shows an image of a man who's, happy-go-lucky. And he starts to overhear everybody saying, "Oh, we drank too much." And so there was a party. In fact, his wife, Lucinda, says we all drank too much in this first scene. Well, Ned decides he's going to go back home. They live 8 miles away in this suburb. And Ned has his swim trunks on, and he decides he's going to swim the pools of this suburban neighborhood all the way home through the backyards and one recreational pool, as we'll see later. And he does just that. He maps this course out in his head, and he calls it the River Lucinda after his wife. And that's the last interaction we have with Lucinda in this story. So making his way home, he heads out across the lawn, and he jumps into the Westerhazy's pool, making sure to dive in, because that's what all men do in this story in his mind, and to bypass the ladder and get out on the far curb. So this is how he jumps in, and he seems to be happy about himself. It's a midsummer afternoon. He's enjoying life. And you get the idea that he feels like a bit of an explorer, like, Lewis and Clark or Odysseus. His name is Nettie Merrill, Neddy Merrill. And he sets out on his expedition, coming up on one neighbor and or acquaintance after the other, swimming through each pool from end to end, making sure to exit the pool at the far end, as I'd mentioned. And he's in his mind, he's thinking, and he's swimming through these first few pools, and he's thinking the natives are hospitable. He doesn't tarry, but he stays long enough to get a drink for those that offer. And when he gets to a yard, he steps through the hedge or over the hedge, and he just jumps into the pool. And he's often noticed, but largely people, they'll say hi, or sometimes he'll just swim by the window and they'll notice him. And sometimes they'll stop and talk to him or give him a drink, and he'll stick around and get a drink. But then he comes up on this pool. It's just the family called the Bunkers pool. He's still high in spirits, where he's received with affection and hospitality and another gin and tonic. And here at the Bunkers, that Ned starts to hear thunder in the distance, and you start to get this idea. I mean, you still don't get it, but as the day's not exactly perfect. And he leaves the party, and he continues on the adventure unhindered, not a big deal. And halfway through the journey, he finds himself at a place called the Levy's place, Levy, and it may be Levy's. I'm going to use a Levy. And he's alone there, but he helps himself to another drink. So he's already had a few drinks. As you can imagine, they must have had a big party last night. So he's still very pleased with himself and the situation. But then the thunder begins to increase, and suddenly he becomes aware that the hour's a bit late, and the darkness of the storm is coming on, and he decides to hasten his journey a bit. And it does start to rain a little bit, so he waits the storm out under the Levy's gazebo, and he's still basking in he loves this rain, he loves this storm. I think he calls it unmistakable sound of good news, cheer, and glad tidings for the first watery notes of a storm. This is a quote from Nettie. That's what he's thinking. But that when that storm comes through, the air gets chilly, and so you're starting to get this imagery of going from this summer day. This is that time compression to he's chilly, and he feels the chill, and he begins to shiver, and the force of the wind strips this maple of all its leaves, and they're red and yellow, and they So now it's kind of a autumn, like red and yellow leaves, and they're scattered all over the grass and water. That's where we start to see this time compression. It's going from midsummer afternoon to autumn under the levee's gazebo here. And so shivering from the chill, Ned sets back out and crosses this abandoned riding ring, and he doesn't remember that this place is abandoned and that this family has all these horses and stuff, but the grass has grown up. He's not sure what's happened. He's starting to question his memory a little bit, but he just continues on. And then he reaches the pool, the Welcher's pool, and he finds that it's dry. And he doesn't remember. He can tell they've gone away, but he doesn't remember them going away. But then he sees a for sale sign nailed to the tree. He's asking himself, well, when did this happen? And he just struggled to remember the last time he'd seen them. And here he begins to wonder if his sense of truth has been damaged. But that's only temporary. He's still energetic, Nettie, and this is where that theme of somewhat of bit of a denial starts to creep in here, or becomes noticeable. He instantly revived to his earlier zeal at the distant sound of a tennis match. He hears people having a good time, and so he thinks to himself, this is the day Nettie Merrill swims across the county. And he continues on, and when his next obstacle is Route 424, it's a highway that he has to cross, and he's in his swim trunks, no shoes, wet from the rain and from swimming through pools. And the highway's very busy, and it's hard to get across. And people are, I think, saying abusive things to him. There are no actual words in here, but and maybe throwing stuff at him. I don't know. But he makes it to the median, and it takes him a good 15 or 20 minutes to cross this median. At least that's what it seems like. So, but he gets across. He's undaunted by that. And then his next obstacle, something that he'd rather not do, is swim in a public pool. He does not like, as soon as you come up to it, it's got a set of rules, and you can smell the chlorine, and all the pools that he's been swimming through up till now have been affluent people's backyards, and a lot of them have been fed by springs and or streams, and they've got that kind of an emerald hue, if you've ever been in one of those types of pool. Now, he preferred that over the chlorine and the rules and the lifeguards. So he dives in and he swims, and lifeguards are screaming at him because he doesn't have the proper they have to wear a bracelet or a disc or something on their arm. And so he just ignores them. He gets out and he goes on his way. So he got across that pool. He's still going to do it. And he makes it back, through that rec hall or recreational grounds, maybe a park. And he gets back into the suburban neighborhoods, suburbia. And he comes up on this next place, and it's the Holleran's place. And they're known for just hanging out nude in their swimming pool. So he politely takes off his swim trunks, and they're on the back porch or in the backyard. And he takes off his swim trunks and he swims across the pool. And he gets out on the curb still on the far end. And as he's exiting, Mrs. Holleran says to him, "We've been terribly sorry to hear all about the house, and that you sold your house, and that you're poor children." And he cuts her off, and he says that he doesn't recall selling the house, and his girls are at home. So while he's leaving the Holleran's place, and she just kind of waves by to him, Ned, when he's leaving her place, Ned begins to feel weary now. He's kind of getting tired. This is all this, and he's chilled too. The Halloran's place is a place where their daughter and her husband live, and Ned remembers that, and so he decides he needs a whiskey, and so he's going to go get a whiskey from the Helen, their daughter, and he gets there and asks for a whiskey, and Helen's, she's apologetic, but she says there hasn't been any booze in the house for 3 years since Eric's operation, and then Eric's there, and I guess his midriff is bare, and Ned can see the scars of the operation, and then again he's starting to go, hey, what's going on? And it's because he's in denial. He doesn't remember all the bad things. He's suffered some sort of a trauma, and other people in the neighborhood have too. And I guess he deals with it by putting it out of his mind and drinking a lot. I think that's part of the theme here. But he's confused, but he's not dissuaded. He's still going to finish this swim, and he heads out across the field to this Biswinger's party. Ned always avoided going to the Biswangers when they invited him. And this is the recollection from Ned. And this is the other issue that this story has, is an unreliable narrator. Not really sure if they ever invited him or not. But when he gets to the gate, he's not welcome. Miss Biswanger calls him a gate crasher. And the bartender, which is a bartender he knows, serves him, but he's rude. And then he overhears Miss Biswanger talking to some of the other guests, and she says, they went for broke overnight, nothing but income. And he showed up drunk one Sunday and asked us for a loan for $5,000. And Ned's still hearing this, and he just leaves. And it doesn't really say how he processes that. I'm going to guess it's working on, but he's still trying to deny that he has any problems. So he moves on to the next pool. And he's sure he's going to be well received at this pool, because this pool is a pool of his former mistress, Shirley Adams. And needless to say, Nettie is not welcome here either. Shirley warns him, if you come here for money, I won't give you another cent. She won't even give him a drink. After denial of a drink, Ned swims across the pool, but can't manage to pull himself onto the curb. So, somewhat dejected, he paddles to the ladder and climbs out there. Weary and cold, Ned needs a drink, some company, and some dry clothes. There are only 2 pools left. He's still going to see this thing out. He's starting to question why he would do this, but he's not going to give up. It seems apparent. So this time, when he gets to the pool, he doesn't dive in. He goes down the steps and has to help himself along the length of the curb. I don't know if you remember doing that as a kid. I'm starting to see the life cycle of a young man who's going through middle life crisis, and maybe starting to become an older man again. And when you're an old man, you're much like a young child was first learning to swim. So that's the imagery I get. He's making his way across, as we did when we were children, from one end to the other with his hands. And he doesn't use the curb for sure. He has to use the ladder, and he even has trouble getting out on the ladder. And so he does the same thing in the next pool. He's exhausted, and he climbs out of that last pool with a vague sense of accomplishment. It's tainted. Yeah, he's an explorer. He did this thing. He swam the River Lucinda, and he thought it would be this invigorating task. And it was at first, but at the end, it's a hollow victory. After the last pool, he goes to his house, where it's abandoned and locked up. There's nobody there. It's weathering. The gutters have fallen off, maybe from this last storm. And he shouts and he pounds on the door, and he tries to force it with his shoulder. And then, looking in at the windows, he saw the place was empty. And that's where the swimmer ends. So I'm just going to have to get a little drink on that. So the 3 questions we ask. The first one is, what makes it so difficult, and what scares people about it? And I think the test is what scares people about it, because you have to think about, well, so there are some themes here. There's an aging theme. There's a substance abuse theme. There's the theme of a person going from youthful and vigorous to somewhat weary to exhausted and dejected. So there's that theme as well. That's what makes it difficult. It's not hard to read. It's a very fun read, but if someone asks you to analyze it, there are some things you could miss, I suppose. The time compression is that summer to autumn to winter theme. It's there, but it may be hard to, pull up on when you're taking an exam. And honestly, I don't know how this is taught. This is what I get from it, just from reading it. So I'm probably missing a lot too. But so is it worth it? Absolutely. I loved it. It's a little depressing, but so many good books are. To me, the best thing about literature, classic literature especially, is that it explores the human condition. The human condition doesn't really change. Technology changes, but humans need certain things, and we have desires, and we have faults, and we commit these deadly sins, and we also try to do good. And some of us try to do good while some of us could care less. So it's human stories, and that's what I like about classic literature. But yeah, definitely worth the read. And so one of the other things I like to try to do is see if there are any pop culture references. Sometimes these things make their way into maybe movies, or you'll see them in dramas, TV dramas. And there are a couple that reference the swimmer, or at least seem to allude to the swimmer. Mad Men is one of them that's supposed to be heavily influenced by at least one of the episodes by John Cheever. And Don Draper has a swimming episode in season 4. And it seems to be a direct nod to Nettie Merrill and using the pool for purification and alcohol escapism. So, and there's Simpsons actually has an episode where groundskeeper Willie attempts to swim across Springfield through various bodies of water, kind of mimicking Nettie's journey. There's that. So I do think it's worth reading. And the first few paragraphs started to remind me of Great Gatsby and Excess, and maybe it does in a way, because the American dream, the Nettie Merrill, it was an American loss. He had a good suburban, affluent life, and he ended up having, I don't know what happened to his house or his children or his wealth, but he has a sense of loss. And, I think that Jay Gatsby obviously did too. One of the things I like to do, especially when I have a guest host, is do a quote of the week. It's just dialogue between two of the characters in the story. So I'm going to have to do both parts, and I'm going to do Grace Biswinger's part. That's the pool where Nettie swam up to and he wasn't well received, and then Nettie Merrill. And then I'll get to my final thoughts after that. So I'll be Grace Biswinger like this, and I'll be Nettie Merrill like this, I suppose. So Grace Biswinger said, "Why, this party has everything, including a gate crasher. As a great gate crasher, might I get a drink? Suit yourself. You don't seem to pay attention to invitations." There's my impression of Grace Biswinger and Nettie Merrill. All right. This concludes this week's episode, the first episode. And now we close the chapter on the swimmer. But as I mentioned, stay tuned for next week for another episode of Ronald Talks Difficult Literature. But this time we're going to have a guest host, Natalie Myers, also co-creator of this podcast. She really helped me lay out how I wanted to present the information. And so I owe her a lot. And she happens to be my daughter. And so that makes me proud as well. But so until next time, grab a book, grab a brew. Could be a beer, could be a coffee, could be anything. Enjoy your week. See you next time.